Oh, really? This is live. Right now. Volume down on the microphone. Hopefully that will help stop some Yeah, I think it would be nice if we could get our conversation. I'm nervous actually.
Would everybody please come on in and join us? Would you all please take your seats? Maybe tap those people on the shoulder who annoyed me.
Sitting here?
Those of you who, could you guys please take your seats?
Tim Dockett,
Sorry to be so rude, but we have work to do, and we have short breaks and a lot to talk about. So in our next session, I'm pleased to, I will just introduce Bob Reisner, my colleague. He's working with us actively at Ursa Major Associates now and been a friend in the business for quite some time. Came to the Postal Service as a technology officer, I think, initially, and then served as the VP of Strategic Planning at the Postal Service a number of years ago, and has been consulting in the space since then, and is a great collaborator, and in the spirit of what we do at Ursa Major Associates, we collaborate and work together as consultants. Bob is also a member of IPODS, the International Postal and Delivery Services Committee at the Department of State. You'll hear more about that tomorrow. Joe Murphy's here, but I'll just pass the mic to Bob, and you can introduce the rest.
Great, thank you, John. We have a very exciting group here. And what I hope to do, what I've asked each of them to do, and I'll introduce each of the three of them, is to talk about what they do for 10 minutes, and I'll try to bring you into this conversation. Wendy Eitan is, first of all, I'm Bob Reisner. I have been a consultant, as John just said, and I was brought into this business 2 decades ago when Marvin Runyon recruited me to join the leadership team of the Postal Service to create a digital strategy. Many of the things that, and some of my colleagues from those days are here today. Some of the exciting things that we did today are now suddenly being put back on the table as major initiatives. The exciting thing about this business is that the marketplace is changing so dramatically. As you're gonna, I hope 30 minutes from now, you're gonna be a believer in that the marketplace is changing so dramatically that there are phenomenal new opportunities, even for those of us that have been around a little while, and then there are new people that we're being introduced to who are coming into this marketplace. Wendy Eitan has a career in the posts. We met 15 years ago, and she is now at the UPU and will give us a global perspective. She is in charge of e-commerce strategy and many of the most exciting things that are going on in the postal world for the UPU. Adam Houck is a former client, a friend, a colleague, and is going to talk about the Internet of Things, where IBM is a senior manager at IBM and brings the perspective of being at the nexus of technology and the postal world and many other interesting market developments that are going on today. And Adam will talk a little bit about the work that he's been doing and about the perspective that that brings in. And as is typical of many of the aspects of this conference, John has brought together both global perspective, technology perspective, and then Etay Oren is a innovator. With a startup, 20 years or more with the telecom world, looking at the postal world and saying, this is interesting, and creating a startup named Communithings from Brussels, and we'll talk about this from the perspective of innovation and startup. So each of you have much more than 10 minutes to say, but if you can talk for about 10 minutes, I'll try and see whether we can't bring all of you into this conversation. Why don't we start with you?
So technology is working, seems to be. So first of all, I'd like to say I'm happy to be with you here today to share what the UPU is doing in the area of big data. The UPU is a UN specialized agency, and as such, we're obliged to collect statistics on the postal sector and to contribute to the UN statistics division. Big data is really not new to us. We've been collecting data on the exchange of EDI, electronic messages, mostly accumulated from the tracking as an item travels through the postal supply chain from the minute it's accepted at the post office all the way through to delivery. Up until 2013, most of this data that we collected was used for operational purposes, to diagnose performance, to report to the member countries where they need to improve their performance, where there were bottlenecks, and overall on how they were delivering the postal items. But last year, in collaboration with the World Bank, for example, we did a large study on customs bottlenecks, and we took all of the data for the last year around the world, and we analyzed what was happening when items went through the customs area section of the tracking. And we found some really interesting things in different countries. Until then, we had thought that it was that the posts were causing the problems with customs, and in a lot of cases, we realized that the customs were just not able to handle the amount of posts going through in a timely manner. And this was obviously a problem for trade facilitation. Since then, we've been dealing with the World Customs Organization, sharing the information and working to simplify the process and then to improve the process. It also enabled us to identify countries who were having the most problems in processing their customs and talk to their governments and to their authorities and work with them to improve the process. Right now, we're examining the data as the items move through the transport section of the supply chain, trying to improve the black hole that until a few years ago was the transport part, where the items would go onto the airlines and the post would lose control of them until they were delivered to the sorting center. And we're trying to see if the airlines are really handling the items according to the routing that was given to them by the post. We're not finished this, but we're looking forward to the results. So realizing that we're really a data-rich organization and the treasure that we have in this data, and wanting to be able to use it in a way that benefits our member countries on postal issues and on policy-making issues, not only using historical data, but also being able to predict the future. We undertook to first develop an organizational-wide data strategy, including a clear policy for securing the confidentiality of the data. And in order to avoid data silos in the organization, we set up a transversal team and sent our staff for instruction and training on how to harness the data and other trainings. The UPU also collaborates as the knowledge share, as we were mentioning this morning, with other UN agencies like UN Global Pulse and UN COM in order to enrich our analytic abilities. This enables us to focus our existing data that has been collected but not used, or to reuse data for different purposes. For example, with UN Global Pulse, we're using the data from Costa Rica to replicate poverty survey outcomes and to predict international trade flows. Our approach has been dubbed internally the VIP approach for visualization, integration, and prediction. We use visualization of the data to give a picture of the international postal flows between countries. The same way we can visualize postal flows, we can also develop innovative visualizations of international trade flows and trade patterns. Integration, we feel, is vital to integrate all possible internal and external relevant data. For instance, postal supply chain partners like airlines, customs, payment solution providers, e-shoppers, e-tailers. If all of this data was integrated, we feel we could really achieve a seamless supply chain for global customers. At our e-commerce forum held last April, Alibaba expressed interest in sharing their information with us to improve the network. And they trust the UPU because we are an intergovernmental agency. So the UPU sees a collaborative approach between all relevant stakeholders in the postal network could result in providing a better service to global customers. For prediction, we're looking into developing applications that use nowcasting to decrease levels of uncertainty for postal customers. Using the data we have, we can already predict how long it will take once an item is lodged in the post to when it is delivered, which is interesting because we compare it against the delivery standards provided by our postal operators to see where it's accurate and where it's not and where performance needs to be improved. So this actually means that a post has the ability to tell its customer when the item will be delivered with a good amount of accuracy. Whether the post wants to do that or not is another matter. Another way of using our big data, where we are trying to outreach and inform our members on how they can use their data to improve their customer service, their operations, and improve their products. So last year we held a big data forum in collaboration with the USPS OIG, which was well attended, and we had a paper from that. We derived a paper from that. And as a follow-up, we did a forum on postal innovation, Internet of Postal Things in our October session of the UPU meetings, which was also well attended. And we will continue with follow-up meetings to continue to inform and engage our members on big data. So in summary, our UPU's big data approach, if you'd like to call it that, is using the data from our member countries, both historical data and live data for research purposes and predictive purposes to create applications that will help our member countries. We also collaborate with UN bodies to contribute to the improvement of international policy making and research, and we act as a forum to raise awareness for our members. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, for the great introduction, John, for the invitation. I think John's around somewhere, and Wendy, for your comments. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I very much enjoyed John Hagel's comments this morning. But what I want to do is really kind of focus a few minutes on being provocative about the future, right? The Internet of Things. Where's my clicker? Okay. Beautiful. So, what is the Internet of Things, right? Is it wearable Fitbits for you, your pets, maybe? Believe it or not. Is it nuclear power plants? It's actually both, and it's so much more. It really describes the technologies, the sensors, the actuators, the analytics combined to paint a richer picture of a physical system to ultimately drive better outcomes. And it's really not new. Right? This is a concept we've been discussing this for 20-some years. It's taking off for a couple of specific reasons. The size, the cost of the sensors have just completely plummeted, combined with the emergence and the acceleration of cloud technology, connectivity, storage, etc. And I think culturally, right, we demand so much more in customer experiences with our goods now, from TVs to cars to toasters, right? We demand that kind of added capability and that experience, right? And what it's doing is it's bringing IT and technology into industries that are not natively IT, right? Agriculture is a great example of this, and the work that IBM's been doing with vineyards in California to increase crop yield using IoT-type technologies, right? So here we are, we're talking about posts. Well, why posts? It's the Internet of Things. Posts have a whole lot of things. Okay, so, right. So IBM, we've been working with the Office of Inspector General since August on this topic, and we started with this hypothesis, right? That there's significant, yet to be exploited value that exists at the intersection of Internet of Things and posts, right? So why posts? There's presence in every neighborhood, the physical, rich presence in every neighborhood, whether it's delivery vehicles, the coverage to people, and the assets, right? Think about the assets. Collection boxes. There are 160-some thousand collection boxes, 200-some thousand vehicles, the employees, the buildings, the parcels themselves, right? When you widen the lens a little bit. And from an IBM standpoint, we think of the world, like Smarter Planet, we're all familiar with the tagline, but we think of the world as being, the Smarter Planet being instrumented, interconnected, and intelligent. And so, Smarter Planet is really the manifestation of the Internet of Things. Smarter cities, smarter buildings, smarter water, for example. So, in this engagement with the OIG, right, how to explore the topic? Well, we did various kinds of research. There's standard technology, desk side, journal research to understand what's going on. We had over 20 interviews with subject matter experts across the globe, from Sahu Reed at the White House, who's a technology fellow, people like Elmar Toynbee, Leon Pinsov, and others, people at the Postal Service, Tom Day, Ed Phelan. And we also did an interesting exercise with the IBM Academy of Technology, an ideation exercise to explore the applicability of IoT to posts. Now, for those who aren't familiar, the IBM Academy is the collection of roughly the top 1,000 technology leaders in IBM, representing about 35 countries, over 10,000 patents. So these people are pretty sharp. We also have the UPU conference, as both Etay and Wendy attended in November. And so I can't divulge all of our takeaways because there's a paper due out on this in the next couple of months. But kind of high level summary here, right, is that posts are attracting a lot of attention because of the network and the infrastructure. Even within the IBM community, talking to the Academy of Technology, people who live and breathe IoT every day, and you talk about posts and they say, I hadn't thought about it, but of course, why not? Right? It makes so much sense from the ubiquity, the coverage standpoint, and the objects and the assets. And I think we also learned that the sequence of these kinds of opportunities really matter, right? There are some near-in kinds of opportunities, such as smart buildings, connected vehicles, for example, which are kind of core to postal type operations, right? From a safety standpoint, a cost reduction, energy saving standpoint, that you can invest in now. There are things that are much further down the road, whether it's redefining the letter carrier's role in the neighborhood, much more pie in the sky, right? But the sequence of these things really matters. So, I think what it tells us, there's something to, and I apologize again if you can't read the slide. It tells us that there is something to this, right? There are forces pushing us towards this kind of equilibrium. The technology I mentioned before, the DNA of post itself, right? Recall, when we think about the role of the post in society, if we take a historical point of view, and we think of things like postal roads, right? 1700s, 1800s, binding the nation together. I'm a history buff, I'm sorry. But when you think about what that meant for binding the nation together, are things like the Internet of Postal Things, can that redefine what that definition of binding the nation together means now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, right? So we see this potential value for customers and for citizens. And there's a nuance there that's important, right? Customers of the post, but citizens of the respective country and the world, right? And so we see these opportunities in products, the operations, the infrastructure, the customer experience, and the role of post in society. A couple of close-in opportunities, right? I mentioned buildings and vehicles. So if we think about smart buildings, and we interviewed Tom Day, as I mentioned, Postal Service has already done a tremendous amount in sustainability. Right? Since 2004, I think they've reduced greenhouse gas emissions by at least 35, if not 40%. But what we find with a lot of IoT, smarter building type project within IBM is that there is so much low-hanging fruit that exists. You would be astounded to find that once you get in, the number of locations you find that there is a heater and an air conditioning unit running simultaneously in the same spot, right? This is not difficult to fix, but again, going back to instrumented, interconnected, and intelligent, it lacks one of those, or if not all three of them, right? And if we think about vehicles for a moment, so that's not the direction I wanted to go. Okay. So this is, in two dimensions, this is how we kind of prototypically think of or conceptualize vehicle movement, right? We have point A to point B, truck travels from point A to point B and then back to point A, makes some intermediate stops along the way. But what if we rethink a little about how you could use the vehicles? Right? And for those of you who have read the Michael Rudnitsky paper from 2011, if you haven't, I highly encourage a read. But think about it this way. So if we were to equip the postal vehicle fleet with sensors, right, and if we were able to collect data along the route, right, road quality data, think of every time it passed a Go Post location, right, what's been picked up, what hasn't been picked up, smart utility meter reading, air quality, ambient light data collection, right, and as you visualize this yellow line moving, kind of in the third dimension up, as the accumulation that a vehicle, the accumulation of the data that a vehicle could collect, right? It starts to widen the aperture a little bit, right? And I think there are a couple of really important things here. Number one, these are concrete examples, right? This is not so much the art of the possible. This is happening right now. IBM's working with Continental Tire in Europe on similar type opportunities and work. And so if we're trying to be provocative about the future, we have to think beyond this, right? This is happening right now. And so, if we think about the challenges, right? A wise man once told me there are no issues, there are only challenges, right? So, for me, it boils down to a couple of key questions. The first one is brand, and I want to focus on the US for a moment, because it starts to cloud the water when we think about the diversified services that other posts mentioned, that they offer. Right, you think of core versus non-core kinds of offerings and the role in society. Right, some are more inherently germane to the work they do today in operations, whether it's buildings, vehicles, etc. Some require transforming the role of the post in society. Right, in IBM, we think about it as being essential. Right, and so how essential does the post want to be in citizens' lives? Can we redefine that some way? I think culturally, these kinds of alternative models, business models with technology, they require a tremendous amount of experimentation. Innovation requires failure, absorbable kind of failure. And this is where Post really had the advantage from the size and the scope and the scale standpoint, where a startup might have to bet the entire farm on one particular product offering. The Posts have the opportunity to try smaller types of opportunities and fail and learn from them. Things like MetroPost. And I know MetroPost has been called a failure by many people. I actually see MetroPost as one of the key victories of the Postal Service in the last several years because it was experimentation. Right? The Post needs to learn how to fail quickly, fail well, and absorbably. Right? The last point is really that it's likely the capabilities in this particular space, they don't exist in-house. Right? And so you can't underestimate the need and the importance of partnering. And so if we're kind of closed where we started with a little bit of being provocative, from just one thought, right? From an adoption standpoint, adoption is always going to be an issue, and it's no different from the Internet of Things. But what if something like a connected mailbox acted as a gateway drug that allowed, and it was a catalyst that drove some additional proliferation in the Internet of Things space for citizens and for citizen services? So I'll leave you with that one. Thanks so much.
Hi, am I audible? Yep. So I'm Etay, originally from Israel, but based in Belgium over the last 20 years now. And I'm the co-founder and CEO of Community Things, which I guess is probably the only startup here that is really in the domain of Internet of Postal Things. Yes, I might hear others in coming hours. And being novice to the post in general, one thing I've learned being a lawyer before joining telecoms is that when you don't know something, quote others. So in order to be more abreast of the industry, I am subscribed to the OIG monthly newsletter. And actually, 2 days ago, I picked up on an important quote that the valuation of the USPS brand is $3.6 billion. And I thought to myself that that's actually quite a whopping number. And I looked at the attributes behind it, and ubiquity was one of the most important ones that actually made that valuation so relevant. And it is exactly this type of value that has brought us as entrepreneurs much closer to the post. As ubiquity, meaning the presence in every street, every day, is something that is second to none, and no other industry can compete with that. And it is in this essence that we have started thinking about how we can actually monetize this and create revenues out of Internet of Postal Things. And what I'm going to try and do here, as an entrepreneur, and meaning I am a for-profit organization, and I would not be here if I was not convinced completely that there is revenue to be made from day one, not only as a vision, but as a potential from day one today. And there is a two-tiered approach to how I look at the Internet of Postal Things. The first element, and that's really what Internet of Things brings, is the fact that we can equip the fleet of the post with sensors. And these low-value sensors are what is available today, which was not available yesterday. And as John Hagel correctly spoke earlier about the exponential price-value performance. And that is really what is provided through this Internet of Things sensors. So providing sensors and equipping the fleet of the post with them allows us to offer end-to-end mastery of the services, at least in the phase one, and then moving to phase two, which is sharing these types of sensing information with other third parties. So without further ado, let me start with some ideas of services which we deem can actually be mastered correctly by the post. The first one, generating its value from my experience and my co-founder's experience in the past, is in the telecommunications domain. And here what we're really looking at is the ability to provide telco information in each and every street spread across all the relevant operators in that specific country. And as you can see also, this is an example perhaps of a B2C site, meaning that we can have B2C, and then later I'll talk about B2B and even B2B2C examples. But here we are approaching the end users. And you may know that churn, meaning the replacement of operators, at least in Western Europe, is extremely high, somewhere between 20 to 25% a year across Western Europe. And price was the major catalyst beforehand for converting between operators. Nowadays, where price reaches saturation, quality of service is key. And here, again, using the sensors that are affixed to the cars across the postal industry, we are able to measure the quality of service across 2G, 3G, 4G, with comparative data across all the operators. Now, a customer, an end user, will go to this site, punch in the actual address, key in the address, and then find out how they are performing that specific address for each of the operators. Once that is done, they can actually decide to stay with the current contract or switch to another one. When they decide to switch to another one, there is the commission that the post gets through it. So the post may not be seen directly here, but they are, of course, the provider of the service, and there is revenue for them. And by the way, they will need to provide SIM cards. How is that done? The post. So an extra revenue, which consolidates the conventional one already. But that's not it. If before I was talking only about customers, there are also the B2B angle. And here we're talking about the enterprises and the operators themselves, who would find this type of information extremely useful for their own evaluation. Because today, even operators are using different types of measurement systems, which are very costly and are done seldomly throughout the year. But they cannot have this granular information on a very frequent basis. So they would be the obvious next in line customer for this type of information. And as such, suddenly the post can generate revenues from the end users, but also from enterprises and the telco operators out there. So this is already the first example of an immediate potential revenue generator. But if we start looking at that, then we can start also evaluating other detection and monitoring types of services. So here, find my bike, find my pet. Some of the folks are already doing that. In Belgium, for example, they already apply this to bikes. Okay, but here, the potential is simply by the fact that we are increasing the number of sensors. We are including here Bluetooth type of technology, NFC, RFID, you name it, and they are all providing then these type of services. But even Smart Bin, which has been around now for several years and rather successfully, is also a service that could interest the post. Why is that? Smart Bins today are provided to mainly medium to large types of containers, for the simple reason that battery has a limited consumption cycle, and if it is used very actively as it's done today, it would need to be replaced after a few months. But if you introduce the technology of low energy Bluetooth, for example, then suddenly the fleets are the ones who are providing the signals to the bins, and the bins are simply responding, and as a result consume much less energy. So suddenly even smart bins can be a very relevant type of service, which is a revenue generator for the post. So I can go on and on, but I don't have that much time to talk about what other services are available. There is a white paper that we wrote specifically about that is available outside. But I would like also to talk about another notion, which is the sensing as a service, which I think is very much linked to what John Nagel said at the outset of this day. Scalable learning. What scalable learning for us is the ability to take raw data, which is provided from the sensors, and use that alongside other third parties to create new types of reports which are serving the customer. And we were talking before about how it is that we can respond to the customer correctly. And that's a great way of doing so. And here, that allows to introduce a new player in the market called the data aggregator, which again, I think John was mentioning aggregation as a very important part of the broader ecosystem of services. And here in this ecosystem, a data aggregator is potentially, for example, a mobile operator or others, would be the ones that are serving other third parties, generating such type of information and compiling it with the postal information that is already generated as raw data, coming up with very relevant reports. Let me give you an example. Air pollution, Adam was mentioning this correctly, is a great way to use our sensors to collect data. But I beg to differ on one point. It is very relevant to get granular information on each and every street once a day. But what about throughout the day? We need that frequency of information, which the Post might not have unless Swiss Post owns the buses as well. Okay, but if that's not the case, you will need to use other public transport alternatives. And here, the public transport companies that are served perhaps by other data aggregators would be providing that frequent information on the main arteries, so the trams, the bus, the trains, would then be combined to the information that is collected on every street across the city once a day to have that very important cartography, the heat map that is so relevant for the residents of the city. But that would not be done on its own. It's about scalable learning. The combined partnerships with other third parties is what will make it so relevant for us. Now, you can probably say, okay, air pollution is great, it's serving the residents, but can this also generate revenues? So here is a way to summarize what we were talking about until now, taking B2C and B2B, taking mobile coverage and even environmental data, and creating a new source of untapped revenue in B2B2C. Here there is an example of a classified ads type of site. Actually, the format and names that are used from examples that are available today in Europe. Well, now there are many similarities to today's cases where you already put the relevant address and the price of the apartment, etc. But at the bottom of the page, as an announcer, you are now told that you are scoring extremely well in your street on mobile coverage, but you're also doing extremely well on environmental data. So suddenly, that is extremely valuable information which sets you aside from the rest of the pack. So why not charge a premium for that type of information? So until now, you were paying only 50 euros a month just for the announcement. Now pay an extra 25 euros to actually differentiate your ad from the others. And behind that, again, the Post generates some revenues. So how would the customer see this? They would go to that site, and now they would look at the different departments available in that region, all having the same price. But there is one of them that sets aside because they have an environmental scoring that is much better than the others. And that's a way for them to see value in that announcement as well. And this will be the actual description of what is behind that scoring. So to summarize, there is a two-tiered approach to going about IoT and IoT. Starting with the mastery of the value chain from the Post, on to scalable learning with other partners. I would want to summarize with one quote that John Hagel was saying at the end. He was asked how to go about 2020. I also think, start small. You have the means of having try and correct and the margin of error, and start with one element where there is a need. We can think of that jointly, find out how it can be improved, test it, and then you'll see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to each of you for limiting what I know that you could have talked for a great deal of time. Brian, if you could bring us back to the slide that we had at the beginning. There's a slide here that I wanted to show you in case any of you had any doubts about why we're here and having this conversation. This is a slide from a Harvard Business Review article in November of this year. What this shows you is that the world is in the process of changing. We talk a lot about consumer empowerment, and yet at the same time, we're about to walk into a world tomorrow, today, in which decisions are going to be made for us. And so let me start with any of you that want to take this on. So the Internet of Things, this is a big deal. It's already changed the world. Decisions are being embedded. Which of you wants to take this on? Adam, would you like to sort of pick this up? So what about this tension that we're going to see between consumer empowerment, grassroots opportunity, and a bunch of engineers making decisions for all the rest of us?
Well, I'm an economist by training, so as we're always taught to answer, it depends, right? It's a great question, because if we think about the typical kind of, I'm going in my economics here for a second. If we think about typical supply and demand as just an interaction of two curves, for me the question becomes, and I don't know the answer, right? And my thoughts around it are that, is there a way that supply can generate demand? Right? We're talking about empowerment, the customer experience, etc., micro-segmentation, what people really want. And I think, as you move along this kind of explosion of devices as they continue to proliferate and interconnect, you're going to gain a more microscopic understanding of what each individual really wants. That puts you in a position where you're either the Steve Jobs approach, which is people don't know what they want and I'm going to give it to them, or I'm trying to listen, which might mean it's a little bit of a trailing kind of indicator, right? So for me, I wonder how much of the supply can really drive the demand because of the players that can really deliver that type of experience that resonates, right, with an iPhone, right? People, something as simple as the first iPod, right? It's a box with a wheel and a button, and you look at it, right? So easy a caveman can do it. Right? You look at it, and it was genius. And that type of moment, those are the types of things that I think are going to allow in those experiences the additional proliferation.
So I want to let any of you into this conversation that we're having here that want to get in, but Etay is going to send cars back to pick up the missing data, or contract with Uber. We're going to pick up the data points. Adam's going to create a connected car that's got 12 data points on. Wendy, where are the posts going to trip here? What do the posts have to do to play a role in this marketplace?
I think that in order for the posts to benefit and improve their services from these new technologies, the key is integration of their networks. Not only with the postal operator network to improve that, it's already somewhat integrated, but also with the other stakeholders in the postal world, the private couriers. I mentioned it this morning as well, or Pascal did, with customs, with the transport, so that the knowledge is available to your customer. The visibility, which someone also mentioned that this morning, is so important to the customer. They actually have that from the minute that they order their item or they send their item all the way until it's received by them. And not only that, but it enables them choices. For example, I wanted it delivered at home, but oops, now I'm not going to be home. So I want to be able to either SMS or send an email or a call and say, okay, I want my item now delivered to my country house or my hotel room, and to be able to do that. I think that's where it meant. So
I tell you, this sounds expensive, this paying attention to stakeholders. Does that work for a startup?
It's a startup. I mean, we are just, depending on what you do, I mean, when you are just a software enabler, you are not that much under the risk of that heavy cost being forced upon you. But let's not forget, the sensors themselves are not expensive. The platform that is used can sometimes even be the same phone that you're using today for other purposes. So the postal of today may actually use the same Windows CE, Internet, or other type of tablets that they already have in place for providing these services as well. So they just need to have those capabilities in place, which combined with the right software on top, they can actually provide these services.
What I would add to that, and I completely agree, what I would add is from the technology in all this is not the difficult piece, right? The technology is quite easy. It's relatively inexpensive. It's quite easy to set up. And from a brand standpoint, your initial question, I think they need to try, but I think that goes back to brand, which is, what does the post want to be? Do they want to have these capabilities, in the core and operations, and on the fringe, whether it's environmental sensing, whatever it might be, but what is the postal brand going to be? That's a decision they also have to make, because the technology is the easy part. It's the collaboration, it's the politics, it's everything else. That's when it becomes very, very difficult.
I saw Gene Del Polito put his hand up here. I want to bring others in. John, I'm going to count on you to cut us off when the time comes, because we'll go on for the rest of the conference.
Okay, I'd like to bring you from the sublime down to the mundane, because while everyone's talking about data, big data, how the big data can be used and so on. I guess the question that I would ask, first of all, is to what extent has anyone had an experience in terms of a post-gathering of big data, where instead of looking at revenue-generating opportunities, they used it primarily to figure out, how do I improve the cost efficiency by what I do? When UPS came out with tracking and tracing, they did not do it initially in order to be able to make it a customer benefit. They did it for the purpose of improving the nature of their own operations inside. Second question is, it's wonderful to talk about the technologies here, the technologies there, and so on. This might be possible. A post needs to be able to risk. A post needs to learn how to fail. The question is who pays? Where does the post get its revenue? I can't speak for all the posts around the world, but I can tell you that the post in the United States gets its revenue from the people who use the core services. And there's a less and less tolerance for watching that revenue be dissipated on activities that don't necessarily have anything to do with improving core services. So to what extent are we talking about things here that can bring the post back to its core and say, I can use these tools to provide a better service upon which I then might be able to build other opportunities or other characteristics?
So here we live in an ecosystem where we've got technology providers making decisions, we've got consumers, we've got mailing customers. Sounds like a revolution coming here. Anybody else want to get into this conversation, please?
Etay brought up something very interesting earlier, the value of the brand of $3.6 billion. I'd actually propose probably much greater than that, because it enables a $60 billion a year business. However, a key part of that brand is actually the post is privacy friendly, sanctity of the mail, protected information. Now, how do you address the privacy features and aspects of the brand and protect that when you're doing things? What are you going to do to make sure it's still?
I was waiting for someone to mention the word privacy. Etay, what do they say in Brussels?
Brussels happens to be a European regulator, so privacy is #1 concern. But that's why there are quite a few questions that have to be addressed here. But as regards to privacy, I mean, at least in what I've tried to touch on, much of the data that we're trying to collect is public information. Okay? Air pollution is not in any way infringing privacy. Mobile coverage is in no way infringing privacy. So absolutely, privacy should be borne in mind in everything that we do, so that the services still bring the value without going overboard with the privacy.
Okay, so I'm good with this. We're going to handle the big public policy issues by just staying on public issues. Go ahead.
There was just the previous questions that were asked were also very relevant. I mean, one of them was about the performance improvement, and you were touching on track and trace. Did anybody actually think about the fact that track and trace information, if used correctly as a sensing information that is then aggregated to other stakeholders, it can actually be the right solution for dynamic routing. As if you know when a mission has been accomplished, and when you know exactly where that person is, you don't need to wait for the next route to arrive. You can actually combine that with performance improvement.
So Wendy, are there cases that you would point to of interoperability between the track and trace data and consumer networks?
Just first of all, for the data has always been used for performance improvement. That was the raison d'être for using the data in the first place. So that's the answer to this question. And there are posts that are already using this in a dynamic way to reroute. For example, I know for Deutsche Post or DHL, they use big data to design their routes, and they change their routes during the delivery process. If there's a blockage, if there's a traffic issue, or if the customer is found not to be at home, they can actually send information to the driver to alter his route. Or in cases where they have items that are refrigerated and need to be delivered within a certain time frame, they're very conscious of that, and they can reroute to make sure that it's delivered before it's perishable.
Yeah.
So it is already being used to improve the quality of service?
Well, in the U.S., I think it's a notable case of where tracking information is being used to improve service within the post. It's the next step where that information becomes interoperable. Now, to be fair to the network providers and the IT engineers, there's a huge issue about latency and data management, lots of problems to be solved. But I think it's that handoff across that interface. So I'm okay with the public policy issues, but what about the connected car? Here we've got 12 different data points on cars, performance, impaired drivers, cities that want the data. Is it okay? Adam, what do you think?
I think that, yes, to answer it quickly.
So the city of Los Angeles
but no,
should be able to pass an ordinance that says, I'm going to get the data off of all the connected cars.
So it depends on what vehicle you're talking about. If you're talking about citizens' car, you're talking about the postal service vehicles, right? I mean, some of the, I know the research that I did with the OIG when we interviewed UPS for the track and trace paper a couple of years ago, that UPS saw that a vehicle backing up was the single most dangerous event that could occur during the day, right? For that vehicle, right?
Perfect example.
Right, so for that, what you're talking about from a, not only a letter carrier, a safety standpoint for that individual, but the neighborhood itself, right? That's something that is, right, that's very real, it's very tangible, and if you can identify specific components, movements like that, that illustrate high risk, low risk safety, that's a
Perfect example. So I'm the head of Contra Costa County, California, and I'm smart enough to hire Jim Campbell as my lawyer. And Jim Campbell knows that backing up data tells me which of the drivers are the bad drivers for the Postal Service, for UPS, for FedEx. So therefore, shouldn't I get that data? I mean, it's people get hurt.
Now we're gonna have issues also with the unions.
Does anybody else want in on this?
But that kind of technology, right, when you think about the progressive snapshot, that's what, right, you have, what do you want, performance measures, however you like to take about union contracts, et cetera, push that aside. But if, progressive snapshot, you plug the tool into the diagnostic port, it tracks your movements, creates a risk profile, sends to Progressive, and Progressive basically says, we had you at a risk level here, you're actually a much better driver than we thought, and we're going to issue you a discount, right? The risk premium and the costs associated with that, especially spread out over in an enterprise the size of Postal Service, is significant.
I see this slide, and I think Steven Spielberg was trying to explain this to me all along, that this data that I get excited about, that is going to be collected whether I like it or not, because the engineers are going to figure out that the backing up data is there, that the Postal Service can get this data. That data is going to be there. And then the question is, who's going to be able to use it? So with that, I think we're almost at the place. Anybody want to make a final comment? And then I think we've got to return the podium to John Callan here.
Gene asked a couple of questions. And Gene's, the one, I think we addressed the first, I don't know if we exactly addressed the second one about who pays. I think that in the conversations and research that we did with the OIG, we spoke with Dan Morgan, who's the Chief Data Officer at the Department of Transportation. In this space, with DOT working with local governments, states and cities, that there are potentially sizable funds available for small type studies to look into things that DOT cares about. Right? If you think about the movement of goods around the country, right? DOT cares about the movement of goods for many reasons, right? Safety, vehicles, etc. They also care about it as a leading indicator of where people are going to be moving in the country, right? Because that also helps predict the level of infrastructure that's going to be needed in particular areas.
We're on the verge of the era of why not. I saw, I think it's Alan, is that?
But the summary that was starting small with a specific.
Please.
So Bob, I struggle a little bit here. I hear packages are growing, that's really good. I hear letters are shrinking, that's not really good. I hear a little bit about value-added services on core products. That's really good. Then I hear about a lot of pilot type ideas for new products. I guess where I'm coming from is, what are they worth? So what are all these things worth? I never get a sense of how many dollars we're talking about versus putting more emphasis on retaining 10% more letter volume, high margin letter volume, or 5% more letter volume. And, you know, it's all interesting, it's all good, but if you focus more on, or initially on, all the things you can do from new technologies on the core products, where are the dollars in the next 5 to 10 years?
Can I just make a comment?
And to introduce Alan, just so that everyone knows, that Alan Kane, as many of you already know, is the director of the National Postal Museum and formerly senior vice president, 40-year career in the Postal Service. So, please.
I think that the question of the value or the valuation of what these vast services are going to actually add on top of the pie of the core services is of course very relevant, and one can look at it top down or bottom up. What I mean by that is that one of the most important things we should not undermine is not in any way disrupting the daily trajectory of the postal staff while delivering the mail. So if we could find a way to add software to the exact fleet, the exact handsets, the exact tablets they're already using for their daily trajectory, then there is no intervention on their part. And that is key in order to make it profitable. So I would say, let's make sure that even if the incremental revenue is not in the billions, but in the millions, but if the profitability is extremely high, then why not?
Yes. I want to thank the panel. This was a provocative talk. I think we're all going to be talking about the Internet of Things for a long time, but it's here now. So, John Callan, thank you very much.
Well, thank
you to the panel.
Hello. Thanks a lot, folks. And that, again, provokes some questions. And we've heard from Gene a couple times, and Chuck's talked to me, and now Alan, and I've asked the question. And this happens a lot. Some of us speak up, but a lot of us don't. And we want everybody to speak up and have an opportunity to say something, even if it's not in a public environment, perhaps. So we're building in a new tool here and a new approach, and that is to move into a workshop mode. It's an experiment, so let's see how it works. But we're going to ask some pretty simple and perhaps provocative questions that we want everybody to respond to. First, a question that will be almost a yes or no, that we can respond through the poll everywhere. And I'll introduce Michael in just a second. And then each table has a facilitator who's had some training with us, who's going to engage in a little deeper discussion, and we'll get some responses. So we're really eager to get people's thoughts. And these questions are pretty broad, and there's no real quantitative answer to them. So feel comfortable with what you're doing. To do this, because I wouldn't know how to do it, I'm certainly not equipped to try to run something like this, we have brought in Michael Barrett, and I'd like to introduce Michael Barrett from Residence. He is a certified master facilitator, and has been working with me for the past several months on designing this program. And hopefully for the next 45 minutes, you'll be very engaged, and we'll have some more learning and some more questions to surface and talk about with the rest of the panels. So with that, it's all yours, Michael.
Thank you. Am I on? Yeah. Well, again, thank you, John. John and I have actually been talking about this part of your seminar for the last 3 years. And much of the feedback that you've provided to us has said, we want more dialogue. I mean, you're very interested. Clearly, you're here. You're passionate about this topic. We've heard a lot of provocative discussion, and we want to give you an opportunity now to add to that discussion as well. And so, as John said, we're going to have a couple of workshop sessions over today. This morning, we're going to be having some breakouts based on some of the discussions that you've heard, the presentations that you've heard. The afternoon, we'll do the same thing to wrap it up. Before we do that, though, what we want to do is we want to get you involved. Actually, before I do that, I need to do a little logistics here because, as John mentioned, we've got table facilitators at each group or each table. We do have a couple, though, that have had some conflicts to come up. I need to ask, is Pierce Meyer in the room? Would you land at 16? Are you at 16? Very good. Good to go? Excellent. And Shay, yeah, I don't believe Shay is here.
Kevin is drafted.
Okay.
He's right there.
Excellent. At table 13?
Kevin Egger.
Yeah, Kevin, I need you at 13 if you're not already there.
He's right there.
Fantastic. I think we've got one table shy then, table 14. And what I'd like to do is, for those of you who are at table 14, I'm going to ask the facilitators at the other tables, raise your hand if there's an open seat. And folks at table 14, if you could just kind of find your way to another session for the next 30 minutes. It looks like we have plenty of options here. Excellent. Thank you all. While you're getting seated, what I'd like to do is we're going to have two parts. As I said, we're going to have a table discussion. But before we do that, what I wanted to do is to give you an opportunity to interact with us directly. I'm curious, has anybody used Poll Everywhere? Anybody? A couple of folks have. So what we want to do is, if you have a smartphone, you're able to use this tool. We're going to ask a couple of questions that everybody in the room can respond to. It's going to really set the tone, if you will, for the table discussions that follow. By the way, there are handouts at each one of your tables with this chart on it. If you'd like to get that, they should be in the center of the room. Now, just going to let me briefly walk you through what we're going to do. We'll use this several times over the next day. So, with this tool, you can respond either with text or with a web browser. Either one works. It's really whatever you are most convenient, most comfortable with. So let's first start with the text. So again, those of you who have got a smartphone, first thing you want to do is to number 22333. That is Poll Everywhere number. You want to text the word resonance to it. That's actually going to open up our chat room. You'll get a response from them momentarily letting you know you've joined. You'll see you've joined Michael Barrett's resonance session. And stick at that point for a minute. We're going to have a couple of test polls in just a minute to make sure everything is working. But if you want to use text, again, type the term resonance, RESONANCE, 22333. And as you see on the screen on the left, you'll get a response momentarily. If you would rather use the web browser on your phone, then go to polled.com/resonance. Again, you can see it on the screen, polled.com/resonance. Now, on this one, if they prompt you, you don't need to download the app, so you can press choose not now. And then you don't need to log in. When we start to run the polls, they will show up automatically. All right? So again, you've got that sheet at your desk if you need it. First thing I want to do is ask you just to get a sample poll going. The first question will be, is 2 a prime number? The answer, by the way, is yes. In case anybody's curious. You forgot your algebra, or even whatever that is. Let me get you into that poll. And when you do, we will get you set here. This should be the first poll coming up. Now, latency is a beautiful thing. All right. I've seeded it with the right answer. So go ahead, if you will, and now, for those of you, if you're sitting at a table and you're don't have a smartphone, or you're from out of the country and texting is difficult or expensive, I'm going to ask those of you at your table, show them a little love here. If you hand them off, you can use your phone as many times as you'd like, but go ahead and do that. It looks like we're working our way through here. All right. Again, I'd love it. So if you're at a table and you can't use it, if you just ask somebody to use their phone, I'd appreciate it. Do another minute or so, and then we'll get on to the second poll. Yeah, we'd love to hear your input. This is not, by the way, the input that we're asking for. This is the way to get you lined up on it. All right. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next question, again, just to kind of get you technology enabled here. Just going to ask you how long you've been in your current home. By the way, just to be clear, if you there we go.
Michael, are these coming up on text, or don't seem to only get them on browser, not in text?
You should be able to get them on both.
It says you haven't opened the text yet.
There we go. Should be open now. How long have you lived in your current home?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not on text, only browser.
Let's try that. Just, I want to get them tuned into the distribution. All right. All right, let's get into the meat of this. And by the way, if you're using text, you only need to type residence once. What we want to do now is we want to get you into the real meat of this question. And the question here is, who is the primary postal system stakeholder? You've heard a lot this morning about the different competing demands in this system. And we want to know from your perspective, who is the primary postal system, the postal ecosystem stakeholder? Now, of course, they both count, but we want to force a choice. For those of you in this room, looks like things are kind of evenly split at this point. Love to hear some more, if you could. Right now, it's looking like the receivers are slightly more than the senders.
Yes.
The text is not working? Huh. All right. Now you get it? Cool. Yeah. Okay. Yes. The last question we want to ask you is big data an asset or a liability for Post? We've seen, again, we've heard this discussion quite a bit today. We'd like to hear from you. Is it an asset or liability? Yeah, we started there. So most of you are saying that it's an asset. Discussion this morning, we heard folks say, well, you know exactly how are the Post going to leverage big data? That may be a question we're going to hear just shortly. Okay. So senders and receivers about equally split. Clearly, you all in this room see big data as an asset versus a liability. So with that, what we want to do now is turn it over to the full team discussion. And for this, we're going to ask your table facilitators to assist us.